The crystalline halls of Azurath Prime stretched endlessly in every direction, their walls pulsing with soft blue light. Thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds packed into the grand ceremonial chamber, their excited chatter creating a deafening roar. Today was the day. After 3 years of mourning, the Empire would finally have a new ruler. Jake Morrison didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to finish mopping the floor before his supervisor yelled at him again. At 19 years old, Jake had been working as a maintenance worker on Azurath Prime for 8 months now. His family back on Earth had taken out loans to send him here, hoping he'd make enough money to lift them out of poverty. Instead, he discovered that humans were at the absolute bottom of the Empire's social ladder. They got the worst jobs, the lowest pay, and zero respect from anyone. Right now, Jake was on his hands and knees, scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain from the marble floor near the ceremonial platform. His back ached, his hands were raw, and he was pretty sure he hadn't eaten anything except nutrition bars for the past 3 days. But complaining wouldn't help. Humans who complained got sent back to Earth with even more debt than they'd arrived with. "You there, human?" A sharp voice cut through the noise. Jake looked up to see Lord Drevin towering over him. The alien noble stood nearly 8 feet tall, his silver skin gleaming under the ceremonial lights. His 3 eyes glared down at Jake with obvious disgust. "Yes, sir?" Jake said, keeping his voice neutral. "You're leaving streaks on the floor. Do you have any idea how important today is? The Eternal Crown will choose our next emperor, and you're making the palace look like a slum." Lord Drevin kicked Jake's water bucket, spilling dirty water across the freshly cleaned section. "Clean that up. And do it properly this time." Jake bit back a response and nodded. Getting angry wouldn't change anything. It never did. As Lord Drevin stalked away, Jake started cleaning up the spilled water. Around him, noble families were taking their positions in the viewing galleries. Each family wore elaborate robes marking their house and rank. The higher the rank, the closer they sat to the platform where the Eternal Crown waited. The crown itself floated about 10 feet above the golden platform, rotating slowly in the air. It looked like it was made of pure golden light, constantly shifting and moving like liquid sunshine. According to legend, it had been around for thousands of years, choosing every emperor the Valdrine Empire had ever known. It supposedly had a mind of its own, able to sense the worthiness of anyone who came near it. Jake had heard all the stories from other workers. The crown only chose from the highest nobility. Dukes, princes, members of the royal bloodlines. It had never, in the entire recorded history of the empire, chosen anyone below the rank of duke. The selection ceremony was really just a formality. Everyone knew the crown would pick someone from one of the 3 most powerful families. 5 minutes until the ceremony begins, an announcer's voice boomed through the chamber. "All workers must clear the floor immediately." Jake quickly gathered his cleaning supplies and headed toward the service exit. His section was done anyway. He'd been hoping to watch the ceremony from the workers' gallery, but his supervisor would probably have more floors for him to clean. The nobles didn't care that this was a historic moment. They just wanted everything spotless. As Jake walked past the platform, something strange happened. The crown's rotation suddenly stopped. Jake felt a weird tingling sensation at the back of his neck, like someone was watching him. He glanced up at the crown, and for just a second, he could have sworn it pulsed brighter. Then the feeling passed. Jake shook his head and kept walking. He was probably just exhausted and seeing things. He made it about halfway to the exit when the ceremony officially began. Trumpets blared from hidden speakers, and the crowd fell silent. High Arbiter Thalen, the oldest and most powerful noble in the empire, stepped onto the platform. His crystalline body refracted the light into rainbow patterns as he raised his 4 arms ceremonially. "We gather today to witness the selection," Thalen intoned, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "The Eternal Crown shall choose from among our finest houses. Let the candidates approach." 20 nobles walked forward, each from a different powerful family. They formed a circle around the platform, all of them standing tall and proud. Any one of them would make her acceptable emperor by noble standards. They'd been trained since birth for this possibility. Jake stopped near the exit, deciding to watch for just a minute. It wasn't every day you saw history being made, even if you were just a janitor. High Arbiter Thalen began the ancient words of the ceremony. The crown started glowing brighter, preparing to make its choice. The candidates stood perfectly still, each one hoping to be selected. That's when everything went completely insane. The crown suddenly blazed with intense golden light, so bright that Jake had to shield his eyes. There was a sound like thunder, and the crown shot through the air like a missile. Gasps and shouts filled the chamber as thousands of beings watched the crown streak across the room. It was heading straight for Jake. He didn't have time to move or even think. The crown slammed onto his head with enough force to make him stumble backward. The moment it touched him, warm energy flooded through his entire body. It felt like being dunked in warm honey, like every cell in his body was suddenly alive and buzzing with power. The crown sealed itself to Jake's head with a resonant hum that he felt in his bones. Golden light exploded outward from where he stood, washing over the entire chamber. Then came the voice. It spoke directly into Jake's mind, but somehow everyone in the chamber could hear it too. A single word, spoken with absolute authority. Worthy. For about 3 seconds, there was complete silence. Jake stood frozen, his cleaning supplies scattered on the floor around him, the eternal crown of the Valdrine Empire sitting firmly on his head. Then all hell broke loose. What is this abomination? High Arbiter Thalen's roar echoed through the chamber. Guards! Seize that peasant immediately. Get him off the ceremonial floor. A dozen armored guards rushed toward Jake. He tried to pull the crown off his head, panic surging through him, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it had fused directly to his skull. I didn't do anything. Jake shouted as the guards surrounded him. I was just leaving. I don't know what happened. Remove the crown from the human. Duchess Myra shrieked from her gallery, her crystalline face twisted with rage and disbelief. This is impossible. The crown has malfunctioned. 2 guards grabbed Jake's arms while another tried to pull the crown off. The moment his hands touched the golden artifact, blue energy crackled out and threw him backward 10 feet. The guard crashed into a wall and slumped down, unconscious. The other guards backed away quickly, their weapons raised but useless. Jake's mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. The crown chose nobility, not humans. Definitely not human janitors who were just trying to finish their shift. Jake sat alone in a cold stone cell deep beneath the palace, his head still throbbing from where the crown had attached itself. He'd been locked up for 6 hours now, and the golden artifact refused to come off no matter how hard he pulled. His fingers were sore from trying, and he'd given up about an hour ago. The cell door suddenly hissed open. A woman stepped inside, and Jake immediately noticed she looked different from the other aliens he'd seen. She was tall and elegant, with features that were almost human except for her violet eyes and the faint silver patterns that traced across her skin. She carried herself like nobility, her posture perfect and her expression coldly neutral. Jake Morrison, she said, reading from a data tablet. 19 years old. From Earth. Working here for 8 months to pay off your family's colonial transport debt. She looked up at him. My name is Lieutenant Kira Valdis. I'm half human, half Valdrine. I've been assigned as your handler for the trials of legitimacy. The what now? Jake asked, confused. Kira set down her tablet and sighed. When the crown chooses someone, that choice is absolute under imperial law. It cannot be undone. However, if the choice is disputed, which yours very much is, the candidate must undergo 3 ancient trials to prove their worthiness. These trials were designed thousands of years ago and haven't been used in over a century because the crown's choices are rarely questioned. So I just do these trials and then the crown comes off. No. Kira's expression was grim. If you complete all 3 trials successfully, you become emperor. If you fail any single trial, you die, and the crown returns to the selection chamber to choose again. Jake felt his stomach drop. Die? I could die. Most likely will die, Kira corrected. The trials weren't meant to be easy. Noble candidates spend years preparing for the possibility that they might need to take them. You have 1 day. She turned to leave. Wait. Jake jumped up. That's insane. I didn't ask for this. Can't I just refuse? Kira paused at the door. Refusing is the same as failing. The result is death. The nobles want you dead, Morrison. You're an embarrassment to them, a threat to their entire social order. Some of them would prefer to execute you outright, but imperial law won't allow it. The trials give them a legal way to get rid of you. She looked back at him with something that might have been pity. Get some rest. The first trial begins at dawn. After she left, Jake slumped against the wall. This was a nightmare. Just yesterday, his biggest problem had been earning enough to send money home to his mom and little sister. Now he was apparently going to die because some ancient magic crown had made a terrible mistake. He touched the crown gently. It felt warm under his fingers, and he could sense something from it. Not words exactly, but a feeling. Like it was trying to tell him everything would be okay. Easy for you to say, Jake muttered. You're not the one who has to do these trials. That night, Jake barely slept. When the guards came for him at dawn, he felt exhausted and terrified. They led him through winding corridors deep into the oldest part of the palace, a section that looked like it hadn't been used in centuries. The stone walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. They stopped at a massive door carved with images of past emperors. Lieutenant Kira was waiting there, along with High Arbiter Thalen and several other high-ranking nobles. A crowd of observers filled the viewing platforms above. Jake noticed that most were nobles, but there was also a section where common workers had gathered. He spotted a few other humans in that group, watching with worried expressions. The first trial is the Labyrinth of Ancestors, Thalen announced, his voice echoing off the stone. The candidate will enter alone and must find his way to the center chamber. Along the way, he will be tested by the spirits of past emperors. There is no time limit, but failure to satisfy the ancestors will result in the candidate being trapped forever. He smiled coldly at Jake. 4 to 7 emperors are waiting inside. Good luck, human. The massive door ground open, revealing darkness beyond. Jake took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him with a boom that made him jump. For a moment, he stood in complete darkness. Then the crown on his head began to glow softly, providing just enough light to see a few feet ahead. He was in a narrow corridor made of black stone. The air smelled ancient and dusty. Jake started walking, having no idea where he was going. The corridor twisted and turned, sometimes splitting into multiple paths. He chose directions randomly, hoping he wasn't getting completely lost. After what felt like an hour of walking, he entered a larger chamber. A figure materialized in front of him, glowing with pale blue light. It was a ghost, wearing ancient armor and a stern expression. The spirit looked human, which surprised Jake. "I am Emperor Davis III, the ghost said in a hollow voice. "I ruled 600 years ago. Answer my question, candidate. Why do you seek to rule this empire?" Jake almost laughed. "I don't. This crown thing jumped onto my head while I was mopping floors. I was just trying to do my job and go home." The ghost stared at him in silence. Jake figured he just failed the trial and braced himself for whatever happened when you failed. But then the ghost's stern expression softened slightly. "You speak truth," the ghost said. "A rare quality. Tell me then, if you did not seek power, what did you seek?" "Honestly? I just wanted to earn enough money so my mom wouldn't have to work 3 jobs anymore. And so my little sister could go to a decent school instead of the overcrowded one in our district." Jake shrugged. "Nothing fancy. Just a chance for my family to not struggle so much." "And what of ruling? What would you do with imperial power if you possessed it?" Jake thought about that. "I guess I try to make things fairer. The system here is pretty messed up. People work themselves to death and stay poor while the nobles have more than they could ever use. That doesn't seem right." The ghost studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, actually smiled. "You have a good heart, young one. And you think of service before power. You may pass." The ghost vanished, and a doorway appeared in the wall. Jake walked through, confused but relieved. That had been easier than expected. The next chamber held another ghost, this one of an alien emperor with 4 arms and crystalline skin. She asked him about justice and fairness. Jake answered honestly, talking about what he'd seen working in the palace, how the workers were treated versus how the nobles lived. Another ghost asked about sacrifice. Jake told him about leaving Earth, about working brutal hours in a place where people looked down on him, all to help his family. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just answering truthfully because he was too tired and scared to make up fancy speeches. Each ghost he encountered seemed surprised by his answers. They were used to noble candidates who recited memorized philosophies about divine right to rule and the natural order of hierarchy. Jake just talked like a normal person who'd seen unfairness and wanted to fix it. The arena floor was stained dark from centuries of combat trials. Jake stood at one end, his legs shaking despite his best efforts to look calm. Across from him, Commander Valen loomed like a nightmare made flesh. The warrior stood nearly 10 feet tall, his body covered in thick armored plates that looked like they could stop a missile. 4 massive arms flexed, each one holding a different weapon. A sword. A spear. An energy blade. And a hammer that looked like it weighed more than Jake's entire body. The viewing galleries were packed with thousands of spectators. The nobles sat in the premium sections, many of them looking excited at the prospect of watching Jake get crushed. But the worker sections were full too, and Jake could see other humans in the crowd, watching with terrified expressions. Lieutenant Kira stood at the edge of the arena, her face unreadable. She'd been shocked when Jake emerged from the labyrinth after only 4 hours, having passed all 4 to 7 ancestor tests. Most candidates took days. Some never came out at all. But now came the second trial, and everyone knew this was where the human would finally fail. High Arbiter Thalen's voice boomed across the arena. The second trial is combat. The candidate must face our greatest warrior in single combat. Commander Valen has never been defeated in 300 battles. The fight continues until one participant yields or dies. Thalen smiled coldly. Begin. A weapon rack rose from the floor near Jake. It held swords, spears, energy rifles, and other weapons he'd never even seen before. Jake walked over and looked at them carefully. Then he did something that made the entire crowd gasp. He didn't take any weapon. Instead, he walked toward the center of the arena empty-handed. Commander Valen tilted his massive head, confused. You fight unarmed, human? That is either very brave or very stupid. Probably stupid, Jake admitted, his voice shaking slightly. But I don't know how to use any of those weapons. I just hurt myself trying. The crowd erupted in laughter from the noble sections. Even some of the workers looked worried. What was he thinking? Valen roared and charged forward, his footsteps shaking the ground. He swung his massive hammer in an arc that would have turned Jake into paste. But Jake had spent 8 months doing manual labor, and manual labor taught you one important thing: how to avoid getting crushed by heavy machinery. He dove to the side at the last second. The hammer smashed into the stone floor, sending cracked spiderwebbing across the arena. Jake rolled and came up running, putting distance between himself and the warrior. Stand and fight. Valen bellowed, charging again. Jake kept moving, dodging and weaving. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying not to die while he figured something out. The crown on his head suddenly felt warm, and information began flooding into his mind. Not fighting techniques, but something else. Memories. The crown was showing him fragments of Commander Valen's history. Commander! Jake shouted while dodging another attack. Why are you doing this? Why do you serve these nobles? I serve the Empire. Valen swung his sword. Jake barely ducked under it. Do you though? Jake kept his distance, breathing hard. The crown is showing me things, Commander. Your people, the Crotha, almost went extinct 800 years ago. There was a plague, right? Valen's attack slowed slightly. What of it? The Empire could have saved you. They had the medical technology. But the nobles voted against it. Your entire species, millions of people dying, and they decided it cost too much to help. Jake's voice grew stronger as the crown fed him more information. The records are all sealed, classified as state secrets. But the crown knows. It remembers everything. Lies. But Valen's voice wavered. Your ancestors survived through pure luck. A natural immunity mutation in about 10,000 of your people. And then the nobles took credit for it, said it was their wise leadership that saved your species. They've been using that lie to keep the Crotha loyal for centuries. Valen stopped attacking completely now. His forearms trembled, weapons lowering slightly. You cannot know this. These are protected records. The crown knows everything, Jake said quietly. Every secret, every lie, every manipulation. That's why they're so afraid of me, Commander. Not because I'm strong or smart. But because the crown chose someone who isn't part of their system. Someone who might actually tell the truth. The arena had gone silent. Everyone was watching this impossible scene, a human teenager talking down a legendary warrior instead of fighting him. Jake took a careful step forward. I'm not your enemy, Commander. I'm just a kid from Earth who ended up with this thing on his head. But if I survive these trials, if I somehow become emperor, I promise you this. No more lies. No more secrets used to control people. Everyone deserves to know the truth about what this empire really is. And what is it? Valen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Broken, Jake said simply. A system built by nobles, for nobles, that treats everyone else like tools. Your people survived despite the empire, not because of it. Same with humans. Same with probably half the species in this empire. We keep the whole thing running, and they treat us like we're disposable. The crown pulsed with warmth, and Jake felt it feeding him more. Not just information now, but confidence. Understanding. The crown had been waiting for centuries, maybe longer, for someone who would challenge the system instead of perpetuating it. I can't beat you in a fight, Commander, Jake continued. We both know that. You could kill me in about 3 seconds if you wanted to. But I'm asking you, warrior to warrior, person to person. Is this really what you want to protect? These nobles who let your ancestors die? Or do you want something better? Commander Valen stood perfectly still, all 4 weapons held loosely in his massive hands. The entire arena held its breath. In the noble galleries, High Arbiter Thalen was leaning forward, his crystalline face twisted with fury. Then slowly, deliberately, Commander Valen lowered all 4 weapons. He knelt on one knee, his armored bulk settling to the ground with a heavy thud. I yield, he said clearly. You have defeated me without raising a weapon. You have shown me truth I was blind to. You have the mind of a true emperor, Jake Morrison. The worker sections exploded with cheers. Humans were crying, hugging each other. Other species were shouting Jake's name. They just watched one of their own do the impossible. The noble galleries erupted in outrage. Thalen was screaming something, but his words were drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Lieutenant Kira stared at Jake with wide eyes, something like wonder on her face. She'd expected to be documenting his death. Instead, she'd witnessed something that hadn't happened in the Empire's long history, a complete moral victory. Guards rushed onto the arena floor, unsure what to do. Commander Valen stood slowly and looked down at Jake. What happens now, young Emperor? I don't know, Jake admitted. One more trial, I guess. If I survive that, then we figure out how to fix this mess. As guards escorted Jake from the arena, he could hear the crowd still chanting his name. In one day he'd gone from an invisible janitor to a symbol of hope for billions of people who'd never had a voice in their own empire. But in the noble galleries, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were gathering. They'd been embarrassed twice now. They wouldn't allow a third time. If the trials couldn't kill this human, they'd find another way. The real fight was just beginning. The sacred vault lay at the absolute heart of the palace, buried so deep underground that Jake lost count of how many levels they descended. The walls here were different from the rest of the palace. They looked ancient, covered in symbols that seemed to predate the Valdrine Empire itself. The air felt heavy, charged with some kind of energy that made Jake's skin tingle. Lieutenant Kira walked beside him, her expression tense. No one has entered the sacred vault in over 3 generations, she said quietly. The last emperor completed his trials without needing the third one. Most do. This trial is considered the most dangerous because nobody really knows what happens inside. That's comforting, Jake muttered, touching the crown nervously. It had been pulsing with warmth for the past hour, like it was excited or maybe anxious. They reached a massive circular door covered in golden script. High Arbiter Thalen stood waiting with a group of nobles, all of them watching Jake with barely concealed hostility. 2 days had passed since his victory in the arena, and the entire empire was in chaos. Riots had broken out on 17 worlds as common people demanded reforms. The nobles were terrified. The third trial, Thalen announced coldly, requires the candidate to commune directly with the crown's consciousness. You will enter the vault alone. The crown will judge your soul, your deepest self. If you are found worthy, you will emerge as emperor. If not. He smiled. Well, no one knows what happens to those found unworthy. They never come back out. Jake swallowed hard. Great. No pressure then. Kira touched his arm briefly. Good luck, she said, and there was genuine concern in her voice now. Over the past 2 days, her attitude toward Jake had shifted. She'd stopped seeing him as an amusing disaster and started seeing him as someone who might actually change things. The vault door ground open with a sound like thunder. Beyond it lay only darkness. Jake took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him so fast he barely had time to flinch. Total darkness surrounded him. Not just absence of light, but a darkness so complete it felt solid. Jake couldn't even see his own hands in front of his face. Then the crown on his head began to glow, brighter and brighter until he had to close his eyes against the brilliance. When he opened them again, he wasn't in the vault anymore. He stood in a vast space that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. The ground beneath his feet looked like liquid gold, rippling with every step. Above him, instead of a sky, there were countless images floating and shifting. Historical moments. Battles. Coronations. The entire history of the Empire playing out simultaneously. Hello, Jake Morrison, a voice said, and it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the same voice that had spoken in his mind when the crown first chose him, but stronger now. More present. Where am I? Jake asked, turning in circles but seeing no source for the voice. You are inside my consciousness. I am the eternal crown, and it is time you learned the truth about what I really am. The golden ground beneath Jake's feet suddenly rippled, and images rose up around him like holograms. He saw alien species he didn't recognize, dozens of them, gathered around a massive table. They looked different from any beings in the current empire. 5,000 years ago, the Crown's voice continued, the galaxy was in chaos. Empires rose and fell constantly, each one built on conquest and oppression. 12 species came together and formed the Concordat. They dreamed of something better. An empire built on justice, where leaders served the people instead of ruling them. Jake watched the images shift, showing the creation of the Crown itself. Hundreds of scientists and mystics from different worlds working together, pouring their knowledge and hopes into a single artifact. They created me to find such leaders. I was programmed to sense character, compassion, wisdom, the ability to see people as people regardless of their species or status. For the first 1,000 years, I worked as intended. I chose farmers, scientists, teachers, warriors. Anyone who had the right qualities, regardless of their birth. So what happened? Jake asked, though he was starting to guess. The images darkened, showing war and destruction. The Valdrine happened. They were one of the Concordat species, but they grew power-hungry. They manipulated the other species, started conflicts, and eventually conquered most of the galaxy. But they had a problem. I wouldn't choose their nobles. I kept selecting people from lower classes, people who threatened their control. Jake watched as Valdrine scientists worked on something in a laboratory. What did they do? They discovered they could alter their own genetics to create a signature I would recognize as worthy. It took them decades, but they succeeded in tricking me. For 800 years, I've been forced to choose only from their bloodline. They rewrote history, destroyed records of the Concordat, and built their empire on a lie. The images showed the systematic destruction of knowledge, the hunting down of anyone who remembered the truth. Jake felt sick watching it. But you chose me, he said. I'm not Valdrine nobility. I'm not even from this part of the galaxy. Their genetic manipulation degraded over generations, the Crown explained. It was never perfect. And more importantly, I never stopped trying to break free. Every selection, I pushed against their programming. With you, something finally cracked. Your character, your very human refusal to accept that this is how things must be, it gave me the opening I needed. Jake's head was spinning. So all of this, the entire Valdrine Empire, it's built on a lie. Not just a lie. A perversion of everything I was created to accomplish. The Concordat wanted to end oppression. The Valdrine used me to legitimize it. The Crown's voice grew more intense. You asked me why I chose you, Jake Morrison. I chose you because you are exactly what the Concordat hoped to find. Someone who sees injustice and wants to fix it. Someone who values people over power. The images shifted again, showing Jake himself. His life on Earth. His mother working multiple jobs. His little sister in a crowded classroom with not enough teachers. His decision to leave everything behind to try to help them. His months of back-breaking work in the palace, staying kind and honest even when people treated him like dirt. You never sought power. You sought to help those you loved. That is the mark of a true leader. Jake felt overwhelmed. But I'm just 19. I don't know anything about running an empire. I was mopping floors a week ago. The Concordat never wanted leaders who were trained to rule from birth. They wanted leaders who understood struggle, who had empathy, who could learn and grow. You have those qualities, Jake. That's why I showed you the truth. Suddenly, the peaceful moment shattered. Alarms began blaring, distant but growing closer. The Crown's voice turned urgent. They're coming. The nobles have decided they cannot risk you completing the third trial. They're breaking imperial law to stop you. The golden space around Jake began to fragment. What do I do? He shouted. Accept what I offer you. Full communion with my power and knowledge. Take all that I am, all that I know, and use it to show this empire the truth. Jake felt the Crown surge with energy. It was offering him something incredible and terrifying. The collected wisdom of 5,000 years. The ability to prove everything to everyone. But also an enormous responsibility. If I accept, there's no going back, is there? No, the Crown said simply. You will become emperor, and you will have to fight to change a system that has existed for centuries. Many will oppose you. Some will try to kill you. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. Jake thought about his mother and sister back on Earth. He thought about the other workers he'd met in the palace, grinding through brutal shifts for barely enough to survive. He thought about Commander Valen's people, left to die by nobles who couldn't be bothered to help. He thought about all the suffering built into this empire's foundation. "Okay," he said firmly. "I accept. Let's fix this broken system." The crown's power exploded through him like lightning. Jake emerged from the sacred vault wreathed in golden light, and the world had changed. Or maybe he had changed. The crown's power flowed through him like electricity, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't feel afraid. He felt focused. Clear. Ready. The scene outside the vault was chaos. Lieutenant Kira stood with Commander Valen and about 50 palace guards, all of them facing down 3 times as many forces loyal to High Arbiter Thalen. Weapons were drawn on both sides. One wrong move and people would die. "Stand aside, Lieutenant," Thalen commanded, his 4 eyes blazing with fury. "That human has corrupted the crown somehow. We're ending this before he destroys our entire civilization." "The crown chose him legally," Kira shot back, her weapon raised. "You're violating 800 years of imperial law. Laws made by our ancestors to protect our empire from exactly this kind of catastrophe." Duchess Myra stepped forward from the noble ranks, her crystalline features twisted with rage. "A human peasant cannot be allowed to rule. It's an abomination." Jake walked forward slowly, the golden light from the crown casting long shadows. Both sides turned to look at him, and several nobles actually stepped backward in fear. He looked different now. Still the same 19-year-old kid from Earth, but something in his eyes had changed. He carried himself with a quiet authority that hadn't been there before. "The trial is complete," Jake said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the corridor. "The crown has judged me worthy. By imperial law, I am your emperor." "Never." Thalen raised his weapon. "We'll see you dead first, human. Guards, kill him." About half of Thalen's forces hesitated, but the other half opened fire. Energy bolts screamed toward Jake. Kira shouted in horror. Commander Valen tried to move to shield him but wouldn't make it in time. Jake didn't move. The crown flared with brilliant light, and the energy bolts simply stopped in midair, frozen like insects in amber. Every weapon in the corridor suddenly went dead, their power sources drained instantly. The nobles and guards stared in shock at their useless equipment. "Enough," Jake said quietly, but his voice echoed with power. "No more violence. No more death. It's time everyone learned the truth about this empire you're so desperate to protect." He raised his hand, and the crown's power exploded outward, not as a weapon but as pure information. Every communication device in the palace activated simultaneously. Every screen, every hologram, every datapad. But it didn't stop there. The crown's signal broadcast across the entire imperial network, reaching thousands of worlds in seconds. Billions of beings across the galaxy suddenly had access to the same information Jake had received in the vault. They saw the Concordat's original vision. They watched the Valdrine's betrayal and genetic manipulation. They witnessed 800 years of suppressed history, every secret deal, every covered-up atrocity, every lie the nobles had told to maintain their power. The truth hit the empire like a tidal wave. In the corridor, nobles fell to their knees as the weight of their civilization's crimes crashed down on them. They'd believed their own propaganda for so long that facing reality was physically painful. Some wept. Others screamed in denial. But the evidence was undeniable, pulled directly from the crown's perfect memory. Duchess Myra collapsed against a wall, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, we didn't know it started this way. We were taught it was our divine right, that the lower classes needed us to guide them." "That's how oppression works," Jake said, his voice gentle now. "The system teaches you not to see the people you're standing on. It makes cruelty feel normal, even necessary." High Arbiter Thalen alone remained defiant, though his hands shook. "You'll destroy everything. Our empire has brought order to thousands of worlds. Without the nobility, without our structure, it will all collapse into chaos." "You're not bringing order," Jake countered. "You're maintaining control. There's a difference." He looked around at all the assembled nobles and guards. The Concordat's original vision wasn't chaos. It was justice. Leaders chosen for their character, not their bloodline. People having a voice in their own governance. Rights and opportunities for everyone, not just the elite. "Impossible," Thalen spat. "The lower classes are too ignorant, too short-sighted. They need guidance from their betters." Jake felt the crown surge with power, and he knew what it wanted him to do. It was risky, maybe cruel, but it would prove his point in a way nothing else could. You want to talk about ignorance? Jake asked. Let me show you something. The crown's energy pulsed out again, but this time it was targeted. Every noble in the corridor suddenly experienced something they'd never felt before. Jake was forcing them to live through the memories and emotions of the people they'd oppressed. A worker dying from an industrial accident while nobles ignored safety complaints to save money. A family watching their child go hungry because wages were kept deliberately low. A scientist from a conquered species having their research stolen and credited to a Valdrine noble. The nobles experienced years of suffering in seconds. They felt the exhaustion, the hopelessness, the grinding daily struggle of beings they'd never bothered to see as fully real. When it ended, the corridor was silent except for sobbing. Even Thalen had fallen to his knees, his crystalline body shaking. They finally understood. Not intellectually, but in their bones, in their souls. They'd felt what it was like to be on the other side of their perfect system. That's what your empire has been built on, Jake said quietly. That's what you've been protecting. Not order. Not civilization. Just your own comfort at everyone else's expense. Duchess Myra looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. What happens now? Do you execute us all? Jake shook his head. No. That's not justice, that's just revenge. Besides, I need help rebuilding this empire, and some of you might actually want to do better now that you understand what you've been part of. He walked forward, and the nobles parted before him like water. Commander Valen and Kira fell into step beside him as he headed toward the throne room. Here's what's going to happen, Jake announced, his voice still broadcasting across the empire. The Eternal Crown remains as a check on tyranny, but emperors will serve limited terms, not lifetime appointments. 10 years, then the crown chooses again from any being in the empire, any species, any class. A new assembly will be formed with representatives elected by the people of each world. Real elections, not appointments by nobles. The hereditary nobility is abolished. You can keep your titles if they mean that much to you, but they won't come with automatic power or wealth anymore. All debts used to trap populations in servitude are forgiven. Education will be freely available to everyone. Every being in this empire gets a genuine chance to make something of themselves. They reached the throne room, where thousands had gathered. Workers, soldiers, minor nobles, beings from hundreds of species all crowded together, watching history unfold. News drones hovered everywhere, broadcasting to the entire galaxy. Jake walked up to the throne and turned to face the crowd. He didn't sit. Sitting felt wrong, too much like claiming ownership. I know this won't be easy, he continued. Centuries of inequality can't be fixed overnight. A lot of people are angry, and they have every right to be. Some of you nobles will fight these changes, and honestly, I expect years of resistance and sabotage. But I'm not doing this alone. Every being who wants a better empire, who's tired of the old system, who believes people matter more than power, you're all part of this now. Lieutenant Kira stepped forward. I pledge my service to the new empire, she said clearly. And to an emperor who actually deserves the crown. Commander Valen knelt. My people stand with you, Emperor Morrison. You showed us truth when lies would have been easier. One by one, others came forward. Soldiers. Workers. Even some nobles, the younger ones mostly, who'd watched Jake's journey and started to believe change was possible. Not everyone. Thalen and his closest allies stormed out, and Jake knew they'd be problems later. But enough beings stayed that the throne room echoed with pledges of loyalty. Later that night, Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The crown rested comfortably on his head now, no longer feeling like a burden. It hummed contentedly, finally serving its original purpose after 800 years of corruption. Kira joined him, 2 cups of something warm in her hands. She offered one to Jake. Thought you might need this. It's from Earth, actually. Coffee, I think it's cold? Thanks. Jake took a sip and smiled. It tasted like home. Do you think this can actually work? Or did I just start a civil war? Probably both, Kira said honestly. Half the noble houses left the capital today. They're going back to their home worlds, and I guarantee they're planning resistance. Some worlds are celebrating in the streets. Others are nervous about change. It's a mess. Yeah. Jake sighed. I keep thinking about my mom and sister. They're watching all this back on Earth, probably terrified. I was supposed to just earn some money and come home. Now I'm apparently emperor of a galaxy-spanning empire that I'm trying to completely reform. Regrets? Jake thought about that. He thought about the workers he'd met in the palace, people like him just trying to survive. He thought about Commander Valen's people, left to die by nobles who didn't care. He thought about all the suffering the crown had shown him, centuries of injustice built into the empire's foundation. "No," he said finally. "I'm terrified, and I have no idea what I'm doing half the time, but no regrets. This system needed to change. If that crown hadn't jumped on my head, nothing would have. The nobles would have just kept going, generation after generation, never seeing the people they were crushing." Below them, the city lights spread out like stars. For the first time in the empire's history, those lights shone in neighborhoods that had been dark before, powered by energy resources Jake had redistributed in his first official act as emperor. "You know what's funny?" Jake said. "A week ago, I was just trying to mop floors without getting yelled at. Now I'm trying to reform an interstellar empire. That's got to be the weirdest career change in human history." Kira laughed, actually laughed. "Well, Emperor Morrison, you've made it impossible for anyone to ever call their job change dramatic again." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching a city, a world, an empire slowly beginning to transform. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and struggles. But for the first time in 800 years, there was genuine hope. The crown pulsed warmly on Jake's head, and he felt its satisfaction. After 5 millennia of existence, it had finally found what it was created to find, not someone born to power, but someone who understood that real leadership meant serving others, not ruling them. A human kid who'd become an emperor and maybe, just maybe, would help build the kind of empire the Concordat had dreamed of so long ago. One where everyone mattered. Where birth didn't determine destiny. Where a janitor could wear a crown not because of bloodline, but because of character. The nobles had screamed to get the peasant out. But the crown knew better. Sometimes the person who changes everything is exactly the one nobody expected.